Phil, I would like a triple venti breve latte, please. He might at that. Of course, it's a joke on television, but if you do ever hear someone order a drink at a fancy coffee place, it gets quite complicated. We want to welcome everyone to our Bible class today. Don't know how much this will actually affect us, but we're on the tail end of spring break. So I'm sure there are some that may still be traveling during our Bible class and or our worship. We are in Job 38, if you want to open your Bibles to Job 38. And we are on week 8. No, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. We are on week 9 of our lesson book. Everybody's been talking about God up to this point, but we get to finally hear from Him. And He is none too happy. He is none too happy with Job's 3 friends, although, as someone mentioned this last week, and I said, well, we'll look at it when we get there, which will not be this week. But nothing really is said, I don't think, about the last guy who spoke. Maybe, let's see. Well, we'll just have to look at it again. Yeah, he doesn't mention Elihu in chapter 42, but he's not happy with Job's 3 friends. And while he's pleased with how Job has come through this ordeal, God says some difficult things to him as well. And we will get to that presently. Let's read on page 67 of our book, that's week 9. Let's read the place and the big picture as we can look at this. As you know, Job suffered because God allowed Satan to strike him. And all of this was in defense of Job as a righteous man. God isn't punishing Job. He is actually proving the adversary to be wrong in what he's doing. Job is not serving God for the stuff that he gets, but he's serving God because he loves God. He desires a relationship with God. But Job is afflicted. So many bad things happened. He suffered pain. He suffered poverty. And then his 3 friends came and spoke to him, and he suffered perplexity. Because all through that, he asked the why question he couldn't understand. They responded, Job, the why is you're a sinner. And if you repent, God will restore things. Because you see, God does good things for good people, and He does bad things for bad people. You're just being punished. And Job said, no, something's got to be wrong here. Because I'm not a sinner, or at least not in that sense, a sinner. He says he's righteous and upright. And we learned that from God in the very beginning. So there has to be something else at work. And Job can't think of what it is, and so he concludes that the problem must be with God. God just does not exercise His control over creation in a just way. And that's exactly the argument that people make today about the problem of evil in the world. Now, when we say evil, we're talking about bad stuff happening. That's what the word evil means in the Bible. It means bad stuff. It could be sinful bad stuff, but many times it just means bad stuff. There is moral evil, which is when bad people do bad things. But there is also natural evil. And that seems like hurricanes and tornadoes and what happened to Job. Well, people look at the world today and they say, why does a just God allow these things to happen? This is exactly the point that Job is making. Why does God allow these things to happen? It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem just. I would love to talk with God. Well, now he's going to get his chance. One of my pet peeves is when people, what I was taught growing up, use God's name in vain. When they say, oh my God, or oh God, or something like that. It's just a personal pet peeve of mine. That's technically not what the Scripture is talking about when it speaks of using God's name in vain. In a sense, maybe it could be considered that because you're using His name frivolously, perhaps, when you do that. But sometime I would love to hear someone say, oh God, and then God actually answer them. Now that would suddenly put you in a humble state of mind, would it not? That's exactly what happens to Job. Job gets a chance to talk to God, and our text today was it. Let's look at the place of the passage. To our great relief, the Lord finally steps into the debate that has raged in the book of Job, answering Job in a way that both humbles and satisfies him. The Lord's first speech concerns the structure and the workings of creation and the animals living within it. In this speech, the Lord directly answers certain claims Job has made in his protests against God, and the Lord directs Job to the limitations of his own knowledge, that is, Job's own knowledge, to the great goodness of creation and the presence of violent elements in the creation that God keeps within strict limits. Yes, there is chaos in the world. And I don't know if Job actually gets into the reason there's chaos in the world. We would direct your thinking back to Genesis 3 and sinfulness of humankind. But then how do you answer the question of the natural evil? Well, I would say the same thing happened then, kind of threw creation out of kilter. And as far as the natural evil, now you'd have to understand a little bit about our class on Wednesday night to understand this. But just as there are good angels, there are bad angels. And God has, in some cases, allowed the bad angels to govern certain parts of life. Now again, this probably comes back because of our sin that is the case. They may not have been bad angels when God allowed them to have this kind of control over the world. But part of this is by God's design. When in Genesis 11, when God separated humankind into different nations, and when He confused the language, Deuteronomy 32 comments on that. And he says basically what happened is God chose Israel. Now we're going to hear about the formation of Israel in the next chapter of Genesis, which is Genesis 12, with the call of Abraham. God chose the children of Abraham to be His inheritance. And God took a special concern with Israel. But Deuteronomy 32 tells us that the rest of the nations, God divvied out His angels to be in control of what happened to them. And the Scripture further teaches that they did a poor job with it. Some they just managed poorly, and some things caused them to rebel against God. Now this is all a part of our Wednesday night class on demons. So if you want to kind of pick up on some of that, you can come join us in that Wednesday night class. But there's also a video that we're going to be showing soon that's going to kind of be putting this whole thing together that speaks about demons in both the Old Testament and the New Testament and how this all comes together. But here's the point. Much of the bad stuff that happens in the world happens not because of God, but because of Satan and these wicked angels, for lack of a better term. Yes?
These demons that were in charge of these other nations, would they be the gods that these nations think?
Yes. Yes. Paul seemed to indicate that whenever you worship an idol or you worship another god, little g God, you are actually worshiping a demon, is what he said. And so that is part of what happened. Baal is a demon. As a matter of fact, Satan is called Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. That's what Baal actually means. It means Lord. Now, whether or not Satan would refer to him specifically or not, I'm not sure, but he is called Beelzebub, or Lord of the Flies. But that's really interesting, and I can even give you more information if you can't come on Wednesday night, or if you would like some of your own study, that you can go to it. But the point that I want to make is we have learned this by mining truths from the Scripture about the demons and what things are going on and what they're responsible for in the world. Job doesn't have privilege to that knowledge. And God is not telling Job this at this particular time. God has just said that it is in His will. There are pockets of the world that are still governed by chaos, but that God is ultimately in control. He has ultimate say-so over what happens, and so He limits it. But this is part of the speech that God is giving here in the next couple of chapters, that He basically has things controlled as He wishes them to be at this particular time. And by the way, in the picture that I told you of God and the nations does not take into account the coming of Jesus and how He destroyed the power of the wicked one, and what our place is in that, and how Jesus has given us victory over that, both in present victory and victory that is not yet completely revealed to us as yet. So that's just part of the story. And I'm sorry I got into it because I took 5 minutes explaining it, and you probably have as many questions now as you did before I started. The big picture, the Lord responds to Job by showing that his protests have been made without sufficient knowledge of creation, in ignorance of the goodness of creation and how God contains limited pockets of chaos within it. All right, you have any questions before we kind of jump in to this? Let's begin by reading this first speech of God. And let's see. Okay, let's read the first speech of God. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. I think if you're using a different version, it may say whirlwind. That's a common way that God spoke to people. It creates the whole idea of majesty and power and such as that. So out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens my counsel? I have a rule at home. If I'm asleep, do not wake me up. That's not my number one rule. My number one rule is don't touch my things. The number two rule is if you do touch my things, put it back where you found them, so I won't know you've touched my things. And the number three rule is do not wake me up under any circumstance unless someone is dying or needs to go to the emergency room. So if someone comes where I'm sleeping and disturbs me, I'm going to say something like that. Who is this that darkens my counsel? And this is kind of what God is saying here. You want an audience of me. Who is it? Who are you to ask for an audience with me? With words without knowledge. Listen to this. With words without knowledge. That would refer both to Job's friends and Job, because they both were operating on faulty information. Brace yourself like a man, and I will question you, and you shall answer me. So God is going to give Job a test. Now, I didn't count these. I have been told that God asked him at first about 50 questions. And that sounds about right as I kind of look at the verse. Now, it may be more than that, but it's about 50 questions. That's a pretty good-sized test. You know, if you're in school and they give you a test with 50 questions probably is going to cover a midterm or a final. You know, that's a lot of questions. So God is giving Job a test. He's asking him some questions. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Can you tell me that, Job? Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Or what were in its footing set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and the angels shouted for joy. A couple things here theologically. First of all, God is using poetic language regarding creation. To my knowledge, there is no actual cornerstone anywhere, you know, established by God in eternity. You're just not going to find a cornerstone somewhere like that. But you understand the concept of building, and that's what he's using. Yes, sir.
Would Jesus be the cornerstone?
Well, for our faith, yes. Yes, for our faith, yes. But notice this, when God created the heavens and the earth, the angels had already been created. They are his family in heaven, created before us. We are his family on earth. And there's a difference between the two of us. And this is also something else that we have pointed out in our study of both angels and demons, is that God has a creation in heaven and they are spiritual in nature. He has a creation on earth and we are embodied and that is a part of our nature. God never meant for the two of them to mix outside of his will. And that's another story. We will go on from there. But the angels sang for joy when God was creating. You remember back when we had regular televised rocket launches, you know, shuttle going into space or things like that. You remember the stands as you looked at the people, you know, what were their expressions like? They were full of awe. You know, often there were verbal expressions of awe, you know, wow, as they saw all that. He pictures the angels as having a front row seat to creation. And they are so amazed at what God's doing, they are singing for joy. So it's a beautiful expression. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? Notice, poetic. The sea was shut up behind doors, and then God opened the doors and he allowed it to burst forth. When I made the clouds its garments and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it, speaking of limits for the sea, and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. So in other words, you know, what keeps the seas in their boundaries? Of course, it's God. It's the power of God. He says, who created that? Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? In other words, who gives orders to the dawn? Have you ever done that? Have you ever been able to do that? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Let me mention this. One of the reasons he talks about things like the sea, and in subsequent chapters he'll be talking about things like the behemoth or the Leviathan. Um, all of these are symbols of chaos. Okay? They're all symbols of chaos. The sea was a symbol of chaos. Uh, every enemy that Israel ever had came from the sea. Pretty much. Almost every enemy came from the sea. In Revelation, that is where the beasts are drawn from. In pagan Canaanite mythology, their creation narratives, it all had to do with chaos being the abode of the sea and how their gods tamed that chaos. Well, God here is using those images when he mentions the sea and all these things. And he's saying that basically, I am in control of the sea. Any chaos that comes from it, I have it controlled. I am in control of the chaotic elements of creation. That's what he's saying. Verse 16, have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? That's interesting. You know how deep the ocean is. It pictures God walking on it. Not on top of it, but through it. That's a pretty big character, you know. Who have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Of course, that also is a symbol of chaos. Of course, it is also the abode of wickedness, of Satan. He's the one that created death through tempting human beings to sin. Tell me if you know all this. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. While God isn't necessarily being sarcastic in this, there is kind of a ring of sarcasm there, is it not? God's not being ugly with Job. He's proving something to Job. He's saying, Job, you are asking me questions, and you have no idea what you're asking. You are dealing with questions of justice, and you don't understand how justice works on a cosmic scale. You're asking questions about chaos and pain and all of these things, and you have no idea how this fits in the creation that I have made. The creation which basically is good. Everything God created, he says it's good, and then he put people in it. What did he say? It's very good. God made everything to be good. Creation is good, but creation has been marred by sin. That's the reason God has to restore it. Interestingly enough, that's why I believe everything is not going to be burnt up at the coming of Jesus. I think it's going to be laid bare. The way you would burn a lawn so that it could grow again. That's what he's going to do with creation. He's going to lay it bare so that he can renew it to what he intended it to be. Now, we can argue about that at a later date, but anyway, that's my belief. Verse 22, have you entered the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of the hail? I would imagine those storehouses are just about getting empty in Boise, don't you think? I mean, it's 55 degrees. The next morning you wake up, there's snow on the ground. I mean, how do you... But hopefully, unless you just love snow, which my wife does, hopefully those storehouses are going to be establish a time of refilling very soon, and not necessarily just being emptied out. Or the storehouses of hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle. So here he mentions actually divine judgments when he talks about hail. And I have seen some big sleet here. I don't think I've seen a lot of hail. Tell me, you natives. We get some hail too. Not big, yeah. Where I come from in the South, as you probably have heard, there are a lot of tornadoes that have gone through just over the past weekend, and we always got a lot of hail. That usually come as a result of thunderstorms and such as that. There are people that had very lucrative businesses taking dents out of cars because of that. What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed? That's interesting. He talks about storehouses of snow, storehouses of hail. What about storehouses of lightning? Where does God keep His lightning? And the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth. Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorms? To water a land where no man lives, a desert with no one in it. To satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass. Does the rain have a father who fathers the drops of dew, from whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? When the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen. Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Wow. And he says, who put the stars up there where they are? Who calls them forth? Who lead the bear out with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you? Here we are, lightning bolt reporting for duty. And notice the poetry involved. Who endowed the heart with wisdom or gave understanding to the mind? That is a question that philosophers are still trying to find out today. What is the nature of consciousness? Are we really here? Do we really exist? I believe it was, who was it? Said, I think, therefore I am. Descartes. It was Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Descartes was saying basically, I exist because I can think, is what he was saying. But we still don't have a really good understanding of what consciousness is today. How does the mind work? Questions that we don't understand. Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens when the dust becomes hard and the clods of the earth stick together? Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions? When they crouch in their dens or lie in a wall, in a thicket, who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Ever seen mountain goats up there hanging on the side of those rocky cliffs? And you wonder, how in the world could they possibly have gotten up there? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? They crouch down and bring forth their young. Their labor pains are ended. Their young thrive and grow strong in the wild. They leave and do not return. Who let the wild donkey go free? Who untied his ropes? I gave him the waste land as his home, the salt flats as his habitat. Some of this, of course, is written for people that would be familiar with that area of the world. He laughs at the commotion in the town. He does not hear a driver's shout, speaking of the donkey still. He ranges the hills for his pasture and searches for any green thing. Will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will he stay by your manger at night? Can you hold him to the furrow with a harness? Will he till the valleys behind you? Will you rely on him for his great strength? Will you leave your heavy work to him? Can you trust him to bring in your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, but they cannot compare with the pinions and feathers of the stork. She lays her eggs on the ground and lets them warm in the sand, unmindful that a foot may crush them, that some wild animal may trample them. She treats her young harshly, as if they were not hers. She cares not, for her labor was in vain. For God did not endow her with wisdom or give her a good share of sense. I've known people like that too. Yet when she spreads her feathers to want, she laughs at the horse and rider. Do you give the horse his strength, or clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Do you make him leap up like a locust, striking terror with his proud snorting? He paws fiercely, rejoicing in his strength, and charges into the fray. He laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. He does not shy away from the sword. He here, in all of this, God is relating the glory of creation. Occasionally, he will even speak of the chaos that is found within creation itself. The quiver rattles against his side along with the flashing spear and lance. In frenzied excitement, he eats up the ground. He cannot stand until the trumpet sounds. He cannot stand when the trumpet sounds. At the blast of the trumpet, he snorts. Aha! He catches the scent of battle from afar, the shout of commanders and the battle cry. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command or build its nest on high? He dwells on a cliff and stays there at night. A rocky crag is his stronghold. From there he seeks out his food. His eyes detect it from afar. His young ones feast on blood. Where the slain are, there is he. The Lord continues to talk with Job. Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. In other words, okay, God, Job, now it's time to hear from you. Can you do all these things? And the answer is no. Here's creation. I'm in charge of the chaos. You don't understand what you're talking about. So now I want to know, what is it that you want to say? Then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. Kind of reminds me of I had a Bible reference I was going to mention. Job, well, what is it? In Proverbs, it's stated two ways. One proverb says, answer a fool, and the other says, do not answer a fool. In this case, God answered the fool. And the difference was, Job realized he was a fool. And I think that is the difference between answer a fool and don't answer a fool. Because to one, he will realize he's a fool, but the other will just go on his business. There are some people who would make questions and demands of God today. And they are fools, basically, in the sense that they will not be humbled to stand in the place of God. But if anybody were here with God, just as Job was, they would truly realize his awesome power. And so Job was given a great privilege to have God speak. And in this case, Job says, I'm not going to say anything else. So let's pause here then in our reading. God's initial question. So this is number 1 on page 68. Since Job has been claiming that God does nothing to stop injustice and evil, how would the Lord's appearance in a storm be both encouraging and challenging to Job? You have an answer in your book that you studied, or the fact that he answered him in a whirlwind? Okay. Thank you. the voice of God comes through the chaos in that sense. Yes, Jerry, what did you have to say? Excellent. She says it was encouraging him because God finally did come. But it was challenging in the sense that he says you lack knowledge. You don't understand. Good point, Saul. And think about that. Is not the whirlwind, that's just another way of saying tornado. You realize that. And that in itself is a symbol of chaos, right? But God is speaking what? He's speaking through it. God can speak through the chaos because God is in control over the chaos. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in a similar way, a storm or a hurricane is very powerful an individual overwhelming. God's speech is also overwhelming.
Kind of prefigured what was to come, right? Or foreshadowed what was to come. Good point. That it was awe-inspiring. So was the presence of God. Verses 4 through 7 of chapter 38, God describes creation of the earth. How has Job spoken of the earth in his protest against God? How has he spoken of it? A place of chaos, a place of no justice, a place of no rhyme or reason. How was God's account of it different? What did the angels do when God created? They sang for joy because what God created was a good thing. Verses 8 to 11, the Lord speaks of containing the sea. Remember, the sea is often a symbol of cosmic chaos. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, we read of God's ruling over the raging sea from on high, or setting a limit to it. How is God's treatment of the sea described in a very different way in this passage? How does he describe the sea? As under his control. It's under God's control. Chaos, by the very name, means there is no control. It just happens, right? But we find that even the chaos in the world is under God's control. How is God's self-portrayal different from Job's? We answered that. How is Job supposed to think about God differently because of these verses? Yes, Jerry. Jerry wrote, God is almighty, he is all-powerful and sovereign. He is not to be questioned. Not legitimately anyway, because we don't know. I think a secondary part of what God is showing him is, if Job, even if I told you why bad things happen to good people, you probably wouldn't understand all the reasons. I think that's part of it. At a number of points in the book of Job, the debaters have described God's moral ordering of creation by describing some part of the natural order. God does the same as he speaks of the dawn. What moral implications does the dawn have in verses 13 and 15? I guess he's talking about (38). Have you given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it? All right, so what moral implications then do you see in verses 13 and 15? That it might take the earth by the edges, the wicked are denied their light, and the upraised arm is broken. You have an answer to that? What are the moral implications of the dawn? Or what is the Lord implying about the moral implications of the order of creation? Well, yes, please.
Might be a little outdated, but God makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust.
Mm-hmm.
And so God's in charge, but it's up to us to realize and to act accordingly. We have a choice. It's fascinating, granted it's awful, but when tornadoes and stuff happen, like recently, it's interesting to watch people's reaction
Mm-hmm.
and how they, some of them say, thank God I survived, and some others say I've lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot to think about.
It is a lot, and it kind of depends on your perspective. And I don't think it's all. I was just looking at this question. I don't know if there really is a good answer for what he says here. In your case, it says the same dawn that illuminates the good also causes the evil to go scurrying back to their hiding places like cockroaches. You know, so maybe there is a personal element in that. Number 3, the inhabitants of creation. This is number 3 on page 70. The first animals God describes are lions and ravens, although sometimes a royal image. Lions are often portrayed in the Old Testament as fearsome and frightening predators, and I would agree with that. I mean that's even in our culture we have lion quote tamers. They symbolize the wicked in Job 4. Ravens are unclean. They're associated with other sinister animals. When God tells Job that he cares for those animals, what is he implying about the complex nature of creation? That God cares for the predators, that he cares even for those things that are unclean. What is he saying about God's creation? Yes, sir.
They each have a purpose.
They each have a purpose, and that God is compassionate, even on those. And how does this form an answer to Job's protest against God? Anyone have an answer on there? It's a tough one, isn't it? I don't know if I have something to contribute to that.
Clearly, he likes ravens and things that are portrayed sometimes evil, and that's what he would like Job as well.
All right. Maybe since Job says that God is unjust, maybe even evil and sadistic, not evil, or at least sadistic to allow these things to happen, God is saying, look, even the predators of the earth I'm compassionate with. You know, there's a thing of beauty in this. Maybe that is the answer to the question. So it's a good thing. Good response. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the fact that things will not always destroy be renewed.
Mm-hmm.
So those purposes, when we think of people right now, they won't even be around. Their whole nature. You know, the lion will lay down with
Mm-hmm.
you can put your hand in a wall and get bitten by whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things, the evil or the bad things won't be around anymore. They will be done away with. But right now, I don't know, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is good. Well, our time is up, but let's quickly just take a peek at some of these gospel glimpses that we have here, so we can begin a new next week. In this, as far as relating it to the gospel, that God is both stern and gentle with Job in some of this. He wants to lead him to some of these conclusions. God's goodness is limitless. The image of God putting a diaper on the sea or cuddling the raging, chaotic waters. Again, it just shows how good He is, even to those factors that we would consider chaotic. Whole Bible connections. The natural order of God's world reflects moral and spiritual realities. So there will be a continued presence of evil, and I'm not sure if he's saying evil here in terms of wickedness, or if he's using evil here in the sense of bad stuff happening. I would think he's talking about bad stuff happening. God's joy in creation. Everything God created, He did for good. And then, of course, we have the angels rejoicing. Yes, Vic?
That kind of comes down to the whole thing here of why God allowed Job to go through all this. And Job knows there's more to this creation than what we see.
He does.
Ultimately, we're going to be with God. So whatever happens here, we know He's in charge, and we can try to understand and do something about it.
Good.
Ultimately, we're going to be with God.
Good point. And one last thing here under the theological reflections that was made is all of these questions just show that we don't have the answers. We don't know. But though it is wrong for us to say that God is unjust just because we do not know the answer. All right, so next week, let us look to chapter 10 or week 10. This is the Lord's second speech, Job 40 through 41, and we will and then answer the questions on week 10. And we're rapidly coming to a conclusion in this study, and you may be wanting to think about what you'd like to study next. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
In verse 30, or chapter 38, verse 32, it says, "For he doth prepare," and in my Bible, there is chapter 1. I didn't understand why or what that's about. So I'm just questioning the beginning.
Well, he was talking about the second greatest coach in the world, Bear Bryant of the University of Alabama.
Oh, yeah, that just crossed my mind.
I don't know. I don't know why that would be capitalized. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's talking about constellation. He must be talking about the constellation, the bear. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. In context. By the way, Bill has just illustrated the most important rule of Bible study. Context is king. Always make sure you know the context. Thank you for your time.